Donn King's going to be talking to us today about PowerPoints, about using slide tools, and I'm going to get him to we can share the screen, share his screen here. We're going to be he's going to be talking about how to use PowerPoints without killing your audience, putting them to sleep. Donn, how you doing, buddy?
Doing good, thank you, Terry. I've got to start out with a little bit of a story here. Now, I'm going to be going back and forth with sharing the screen because one of the things I want to tell people, especially when they're doing this here on Zoom, don't put your slides up and then leave them there. They're a visual aid. They're not the presentation. So I'm not going to throw the slide up there quite yet. A little bit of quick background. Years ago, I was at an academic conference. Saw something on the program that sounded interesting. I thought, I'm going to go spend an hour of my time with this person. Got in there. There were about 8 or 10 other people. And I realized very quickly this was a graduate student who was probably having to do this to fulfill a class requirement. He had PowerPoint slides up there that literally had 17 points of text on the slide. Every word he said for the next hour was on that slide. I looked around the room and everybody had their phones out, checking email and all that, because we knew that those slides were going to get shared to us later. There was absolutely no reason to sit there and listen to him read to us. And I thought, this is horrible. Not only has there got to be a better way, there's got to be research on a better way. And indeed, as it turns out, there is. And so that's why today we're going to talk a little bit about how to avoid killing your audience. We've subtitled it Saving the PowerPoint Baby, because a lot of people think we ought to just get rid of PowerPoint. Now, I did a survey on the Facebook page before we got started just to see how people are using things like PowerPoint. One of the things that somebody said was, doesn't use PowerPoint. PowerPoint sucks. He uses Prezi instead. What we're talking about today is avoiding sucking regardless of what technical thing you use to present it, whether it's Keynote or Google Slides or whatever. And so just some principles of effective interaction. So this is not the literal slide that I saw, but it's very similar to it. This is from a tech conference. And unfortunately, this is the experience that a lot of people have in dealing with PowerPoint. So just with the folks that we have here right now, see, Robert has joined us. Bonnie, Jim, Terry, you have probably had to sit through some fairly bad PowerPoints, I would assume. Is that an accurate statement?
Oh yeah,
100%.
Yeah, I was in finance for a manufacturing company for years, finance and accounting, and if you think that they set the bar for bad PowerPoints.
Oh man, yeah,
graphs and numbers and little things you can't read, and yeah.
Absolutely, absolutely. Because they think it's a way of sharing information. So, you know, one of the first things that we want to get here in looking at this thing, and by the way, I have not set my PowerPoint up the way that I usually do. One of the things I was wanting to do with today's session was to try to do things the way that the average person would have available. When I'm doing this most of the time, I've got a fairly fancy text set up to where I can put myself in a little circle down here in the lower left corner, you know, and have, instead of sharing screen, what it's doing is going through my my camera, so to speak. Because you want to keep.
Donn, would we making you host allow you to do that?
Well, yes and no, Terry. I just made a decision. No, I don't need to be host, although okay. You've made me host. That's fine. I don't want to get too geeky with the technical stuff because I know most people, most salespeople they just don't have the time to dig into the deeper tech stuff. So the next best solution is what I'm doing now, which is to go back and forth between your slides and the person on camera, because it's all about the person, really. Okay, but I just wanted to mention that there are a little bit higher tech stuff, and anybody that wants some help with that, I would be glad to help them figure out how to set that up. It's just different enough that it helps the connection. One of my mantras is connection before content. Okay, now that doesn't mean the content doesn't matter. It means that without the connection, the content won't matter. And just like Jim was saying, people think that PowerPoint is a way of sharing information, maybe a way of saving making photocopies. Okay, so that's not really what we're about here. Okay, so let me go back to the slideshow here just a second. We want to get away from this one and look at somebody who has done things differently. If you see almost any TED Talk, you're going to see PowerPoint used effectively. They get trained on this, although Seth Godin is one of those folks who figured it out long before he gave a TED Talk. If you go and look up any of Seth Godin's TED Talks, you're going to see him with PowerPoints that are mostly images. One of the most watched TED Talks is astronaut Chris Hadfield. His PowerPoint that went along with his talk had 35 slides, not a bit of text on any of them. And it really helps to hold the attention of the audience. In fact, here's one of the reasons that we want to talk about this: cognitive load theory. Now, that's a fancy academic term. We want to break that down just a little bit. Cognitive load theory is basically an insight in how we all process information. We basically have two channels. And for ease of reference, we're going to call them the verbal channel and the visual channel. Now, this is not 100% accurate because we use the visual channel for parsing music, for example. Okay, but still, here's the real insights from this. Each of these channels has limited short-term capacity. There's a reason that phone numbers only have 7 digits in them. Now, technically, they've got 11 digits, but most of us don't have to remember the country code. We don't have to remember the area code. We can retain about 7 discrete items of information in short-term memory long enough to do something with them. Move them into long-term memory or dial a phone number or whatever. So just to kind of illustrate that, if I give you my phone number, 235-1597, you can say that back to me, right? Give it a try there.
235-1597.
Thank you for playing the game, Terry. Yes, indeed. And small number of people here today, so statistically it may or may not work out. But if we try this one, 983-8574-268-9307, can you say that number back to me?
I'm out.
And this is the way short-term memory works. You see, when it fills up, all that was 2 phone numbers put together. Make a 14-digit number. When short-term memory fills up, it doesn't just stop. It dumps. So when we load our prospects up with bunches of information, whether it's out loud or whether it's on those slides, they come out on the other side of it with basically nothing. It reminds me of the history classes I took in high school. I had one teacher who was all about names and dates and wars and all that kind of thing. And as soon as I left his room, I was like, just stunned. But then I had Mr. Bruce. The fact that I still remember his name is impressive because that was a long time ago. He used to tell stories in class. And I know you hear about storytelling all the time. It's one of the things that has become almost a truism in salespeople. But it's just true. People process information through story. And the reason that works out loud is because it gives us a framework, a context in which to make sense of the detail. And we give the detail then through handouts, through web pages, through brochures, but not through PowerPoint. Okay, so let's dig into this just a little bit more without getting too terribly academic. With cognitive load theory, Dr. John Sweller, who was one of the originators of cognitive load theory, had this to say about PowerPoint. Thought we should just get rid of it altogether. But then one of his students did a little more thinking about it and said, PowerPoint's just a medium. It's not the message itself. Rather than getting rid of it, let's look at what it's supposed to be used for. Terry mentioned a little while ago, he used to work in radio. So did I. And Terry, the history of radio, that in the early days, radio news was basically taking newspaper clippings and reading them out loud.
I spent a lot of time ripping AP wire off. So reading up the AP wire.
And the AP wire got to the point, though, where they realized that radio news needed to be different than print news.
Yeah.
So they did a wire for the radio stations. Okay. Radio news just needed a different structure because it was a different medium. In the early days of television, it was basically a radio announcer with a camera. Took them years to figure out how to take advantage of the visual medium. So the problem with PowerPoint and its cousins, got to emphasize this is Keynote and Google Slides and all that kind of thing. The problem is not PowerPoint. The problem is how we're using it. Again, without getting too much into the history of it, PowerPoint was not intended as presentation medium. It was invented by Apple. They thought so little of it, they sold it to Microsoft. But it was invented by Apple as a means for the engineering folks to communicate with the marketing folks. It's an outlining tool. And that's the reason when you start one up that the default is a title and bullet points. We're using it the way doctors would call off-label. We're using it for its effects. And so it's taken a while in cognitive load theory and then Dr. Meyer's work, figuring out what he would call multimedia learning. I just got to share this little bit of academic research with you. Dr. Meyer, in his experiments, one I remember in particular, or not experiments, studies, he took 4 groups of people, 4 audiences, used a trained actor to make sure that they would all deliver about the same presentation each time so that you wouldn't have variables from one to the other. For one, he had just a speaker. For the second audience, it was just the script on PowerPoint slides. The audience was bored, but they were getting about the same material they were getting from the speaker. Third one was what we might think of as a traditional PowerPoint presentation. That is a speaker and bullet points. And the fourth one was the speaker with images for the PowerPoint. Now, they tested understanding and retention. Did you understand what was said? How long did you hold on to it? They tested them 2 weeks later. They found the first 2 groups scored about the same. Like I said, that second group was a little bored, but they got about the same information. They retained it about the same. Third group, they actually had about 15% lower understanding and retention. In other words, using PowerPoint the way most people use it hurts you. And it's because of cognitive load theory. You've got words coming from the speaker. You got words on the screen. It just overloads the verbal channel. But here's the reason we don't just throw it out. That fourth group had a 20 to 30% increase in understanding and retention. In other words, having the image-based PowerPoints. And for whatever it's worth, Dr. Meyer also found that if you had the words on a screen backed by instrumental music, that it boosted understanding and retention. They think it's because you're using both channels. Okay, now I'm turning over here and looking at the chat. Tim Wilson, once you reach a certain age, your brain is full. Yeah, you lose a president. I like that, Jim. We do have limits on that. And so cognitive load theory enables us to recognize that and make use of it. So the first thing that we would want to ask is, why would we even use slideware? I bet you've been involved in conferences or meetings or whatever where they tell you, hey, 2 weeks ahead of time, send me your slide deck. You know, it's just kind of assumed we're going to use it. But the #1 TED speaker, Sir Ken Robinson, never used slide decks. Now, I would contend he used images, but he depended on the power of storytelling to create images in the mind of his audience. You don't automatically have to use it, but if you're going to use it, there are some things to take into account. You look at this slide, this is what Seth Godin was talking about in the little clip I showed you earlier. He was talking about approaches to influence. If he were doing a traditional slide deck, he would have done something like this. And I'm pausing because you won't be able to resist reading the thing. And see, that's the thing. If you're reading it while I'm talking, you're losing stuff. What he did instead was he talked about how the approaches to influence have changed over the years. First, he talked about the factory model. And this was the graphic that he had up as he was talking about the factory model. He had several points to make about it, but the gist of it was the factory model was that we can make more and more stuff for less and less cost if we get efficient at it. This was the first model of influence. And then we moved to TV advertising. And this was the graphic that he had up for that. This was a change in influence. His contention then is the third era, which is where we are now, is leadership. We influence people through leadership. And this was not just a static slide, by the way. This was an animated GIF or GIF, whichever camp you're in with that pronunciation, to where these faces popped up. It was engaging, it was visual, and it helped to support what he was saying. This is just a different approach. And this is taking advantage of cognitive load theory. Now, this is not rocket science, but it is different than the average person. So folks, if you don't do anything else, then when you show your audiences, whether it's just one-on-one or whether it's 500 people, if they leave your presentation going, thank God it wasn't a bunch of bullet points, you think that's going to help your connection with your prospects and your customers, your clients? You just can't help it. Now, in the little bit of time we have here today, and there's so much more we could dig into. You understand this is just like cheese sampling at Kroger. You know, we're just getting a sample here, okay? But I did want to share with you some pragmatic stuff that comes out of the research, especially of Dr. Meyer, but lots of other folks, and how this works. For instance, first thing that we want to do is turn to Seth Godin, not in scientific terms, but in terms of what he has found to be good practice. Seth says that you should have no more than 6 words on a slide ever, period. That's the way he puts it. And one of the first things you might notice is that this slide does not follow that rule. And we're going to talk in just a moment about what the research shows about why you can actually have more than 6 words on a slide if you follow certain rules. But I think the reason Seth's rule of thumb works is because if you have only 3 words on a slide, you don't read them, you grasp them. In other words, you're using the visual channel rather than the verbal channel. Kind of makes sense. However, we know that a lot of us are going to have words on a slide. So the research from Dr. Meyer says use images, but not cheesy ones. And when I say not cheesy ones, what we're talking about is avoiding those clip art things. We're not putting images up just to have images, images that support your words. So most of your slides should consist of images, but if you're going to use words, then there are guidelines, and we'll get to those in just a minute. Leave out extraneous material. What that means in practice is don't worry with fancy templates and stuff. You know, all those templates that come with PowerPoint? Everybody else has those too. Okay, what you want to do is something that is more simple design. This is a screen capture from a talk by Matt Ridley. And he does have words on screen. This had a bit of animation to it as he compared how many hours Adam and Oz spent on making things. The red and the blue would swap places to show how efficient it was. But every slide had this basic design. There wasn't a bunch of extraneous stuff behind it. He says to avoid fancy transitions or animations. Now, I had a student once. One of the bad things about talking about this in a class, by the way, is a student who's absent the day we go over this. You can tell it. Because when they come in and do their next speech, you know, one of the things we said was, don't use fancy transitions and animations. The only 2 I ever use are fade and morph. But this student missed it. And you could tell she thought, you know, I paid for this thing. I want to use all 47 transitions. Terry's mentioning Prezi. Prezi can be just as bad, Terry.
Yeah.
You know, because if you get tied up in, ooh, I can zoom in and I can zoom out and I can turn and all that, there have been problems with motion sickness among audiences. So I would agree with you. I like Prezi better than PowerPoint. It has its problems if you're not connected to the internet, and we all know Murphy's Law. There's ways to back up from that, but you have to take a little extra step. This isn't so much about PowerPoint versus Prezi as just keep it simple. So this student that I'm telling you about, every slide used a different transition, all kinds of animation and flying in and out. And you could see the student sitting out there thinking, you didn't read the assignment, did you? You know, so that's just a very clear thing that comes out of the research, is to avoid those fancy transitions and animations. Rather than have a bunch of stuff on a slide, Dr. Meyer in particular found use more slides with fewer bullets. People who are trying to figure out animations, if you must have bullets, and sometimes you need that information on a slide, then use animations in order to control the attention flow. That way people aren't reading at the same time they're trying to listen to you. And by the way, if what I just did looks like animation, it can be a little problematic to figure out how to do animation in PowerPoint. This is what I would call redneck animation. All I did was make this slide, and then I removed that last line and duplicated it again and removed that one. If you just put them one right after the other, it looks like animation. You don't have to figure out how to make PowerPoint do animation. There's some other things about if you're gonna have text on the slide. This is Dr. Meyer's rules. No more than 2 lines of text to a bullet point. No more than 4 bullets to a slide. A font size of at least 28 point. Now I'm curious, does anybody know what the default font size is on PowerPoint? Tara, I'd say you're most likely to know this.
I would assume it was 12, but I don't know for sure.
Yeah, and 12 is the default in Word.
Yeah.
But 18 point is the default font size in PowerPoint. And so if you don't do anything else, then just change the default font size. You're going to be serving your audience. Okay, so with that font size of 28 point, couple that with everything else that we've said, put it all together. If you've got to have text on a slide, this can work. Now, of course, the best thing you can do is to have the image oriented. But you might say there's detail that I need to get to my clients and to my prospects. Well, if that's the case, then use real handouts or send them to a web page. Whatever you do, don't just print your slides. There is this thing that Gar Reynolds calls the slidegement, this Frankenstein monster where you are trying to make it do the work of a slide deck and a document at the same time. It has too much detail to be an effective slide, but not enough detail to be an effective document. So separate the two. There's another pragmatic thing that you can do immediately that will make a difference with your prospects and your clients. So as we wrap this up, folks, I want to share with you an idea, and this is another one of my mantras. Out loud is not about getting the words right. It's about giving the words impact. I told you about my high school teacher. He not only by telling stories gave me context and framework to make sense of the details, he inspired me. He made me want to get into that textbook and read the details about the people that he told stories about. Everybody who's ever been to college has a textbook that they paid way too much money for that they never cracked because nobody made them want it. That's what the Out Loud is for. So if you would like to get in touch with me, I shared this in chat a little earlier. This is just another way of getting at it. Also want to offer to you virtualconfidence.tips.com. If you would go there, you will be able to get access to a free mini course, just a little short thing that will go beyond some of the practical stuff that we talked about here today. But in any case, I appreciate the opportunity to talk with you. It is part of my mission in life to end bad PowerPoint. And I appreciate the opportunity to help me fulfill my mission. I hope it makes a difference to you and please God, the people that you interact with.
Hey, thanks, Don. Hey, we've got some time left over for some conversation. I just want to say I was really glad about to see the Seth Godin tip, because one of the things I wanted to mention, I come from the radio background and I've owned an advertising agency for the last 3 decades. And one of a rule of thumb that I've been using since the 80s is that if you're doing a billboard, that a billboard can have no more than 6 words on it. And that's really been the kind of rule I've used since I've been developing slides and presentations. Is I try to have a big image with a headline. that mainly as a cheat to help me keep me on track, because I like to run my mouth and I might go off in a different tangent. But if I know the next slide has got this big headline and 72-point type, then I gotta stick to that. So it keeps me on track. And I use the 6 words just to sear that message into their brain. And then they got to hear me for the story. And
absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's the same principle in a little different venue. Billboard, how many seconds do you have of exposure to that as you're driving down the road? It's about 3 seconds. Hardly. Is that what they said?
Yeah. I mean, half a second, maybe it's sub-second. So
yeah. So you don't have time to read, you have to grasp it. And very seldom is the point of the call to action, so to speak, of a billboard to buy something right now. It's to lead you to the next step. Very similar kind of thing with your out loud in general. PowerPoint is just one of the things that I coach people on. It's effective out loud. And if you're using out loud as a data dump, then you're not doing your prospect, your client, or yourself any good. By the way, one of the things I pick up on in hearing Terry and Jim and Bonnie haven't talked with Robert yet, other folks who might be watching the replay, what I hear over and over from effective salespeople is that they are oriented towards helping people, and I was fortunate in my earlier days. I worked in the headquarters at Walmart stores when Sam Walton was still alive. I'm not telling you I was big buddies with Sam. But he knew my name. He was just the kind of person, if he met you once, he knew your name every time after that. I talked to him that I know of on 6 different occasions. And one of the things he told me is his philosophy was he figured if they were making money, they were taking care of people. He said money was just a great way of keeping score. If they weren't making money, he started looking at why. Where are we failing to serve the customer? And so just that whole idea of salespeople, the word sales coming from the word that means to serve, to help. That's what I'm all about, helping people to get their message out effectively. Because if you're not doing that, then you're not helping people. That went a little beyond what you were saying, though, Terry. What else do we want to ask?
Well, salespeople, you're going to bring out the nerd and the English major in me. Salespeople comes from the same verb to help people, to serve people, to save people, which comes from the word salt. So salespeople are literally the salt of the earth. The Latin word for salt. That's where it all started, because Roman legionnaires were paid in salt, and that's how everything was saved. Jim, what do you have to talk about? Do you use any kind of PowerPoint much? And by the way, that bugs me most, that people assume PowerPoint is the native, because I've never used PowerPoint in my life. So it's just slides. Yeah. How often are you doing something on slides, Jim?
Well, I'm doing it, and it's several things that we've touched on. I don't use a lot of words. But I find, especially in a presentation setting, now I don't do a lot anymore, but I used to, if you put words and bullet points, you may bring up things that work against you that they never thought of. It's kind of like when you're doing a sales presentation, you try to anticipate what their objections are going to be or what their concerns. So I always kept everything very, very simple, very basic. And again, I didn't have any really formal training. I've learned a lot here today, but keeping it basic, showing some pictures, showing some key successes with clients, that kind of thing is a lot better, I always found, than saying this, that. Oh, what do you mean by that? I don't have any of that. That's going to be a problem. Why bring it up?
Yeah. Good point, Jim. In fact, where a lot of people start, I think it's a basic mistake. They start with their slide deck. And it's an aid. You probably don't even need a slide deck. Now, the slide deck can help you to make the emotional connection. And I'm sure you all know, as Jim Cathcart has often said, people don't make decisions based on logic. They make decisions based on emotion. They justify decisions based on logic. You do need both. But if you're putting a bunch of words on screen, you're talking to the logic side. So that's another insight that goes along with what you're talking about there, Jim. If you've got a bunch of words on the screen, you're locked into those words.
Well, and you know, and of course it's all about me when I do a presentation, but I always like to, you know, for the personal connection, a lot of times I'll shoot very quickly some personal stuff. You know, this is my wife. We've been married 40 years. I'm their grandfather. This dog, he thinks I'm his dad. We like to spend a lot of weekends on the boat. Boom, boom, boom. And then I pull up the logo of the company. So let me tell you a little bit about why I'm here. And that's where I found that the PowerPoint was most effective for me, because people can make a personal connection from some of the slides. Hey, I got a dog too. Oh, tell me about your grandkids. It's it was kind of a change in the last half of my career, starting to do that.
Took a while to figure that part out. But you know, like we were saying, connection before content. And it's almost cliche, but it's just so true. We do business with people we know, like, and trust. We're only going to do that if we make the connection. And so the pictures, the images can really help with that aspect of it. Absolutely.
It was a little awkward at first because it's, hey, this is, you know, let me start out a sales presentation by telling you about me. You know, of course, it doesn't work in every case. There's a bunch of, you know, different circumstances, but it was just amazing when people had the familiarity before I started doing the sales presentation. If they had a little bit more about, oh, I go to Center Hill Lake. You know, again, I have a dog. Or, well, hey, since you brought up your grandkids, let me show you pictures of my kids, or whatever the case is. It was just, it really, really helps.
Oh, absolutely. And I think, you know, we were talking about doing this thing virtually since we've gone on Zoom, even more so. Like, you know, if you see my shoulder moving a little oddly over here, you know, I've got my cat right here.
Yeah.
You know, he doesn't care what else I'm doing. He decided he wanted some attention. He's jumping up here right now. That's not a bug, as Microsoft would say. It's not a bug, it's a feature.
Yeah.
I really think it helps us to connect with each other on that personal level.
Well, that's everything. Bonnie, anything you'd like to add? Any questions that you have?
No, I was actually going to piggyback on what Jim Furbush said. We actually do all our sales through Zoom. So this was actually very helpful for me. We do all our presentations with, it's a presentation sheet, or we could use PowerPoint. And I myself don't use PowerPoint because I'm really analytical. And I know that when somebody showed me the product, I wasn't listening to them because I was reading the scripts or whatever they had on in front of me. So I was like, okay, I guess I'm already doing a couple things right. And I also like to get really personal before we start talking about sales to lead onto the visual and what I'm going to talk about. But we have this rule. I don't know if you guys have ever heard of forming people. FORM. It's family, orientation, recreation, and I can't
Mission.
think of the
Mission is
What
often the
that?
last one. Yeah. What are you about in
Yeah.
your life?
mission. Yeah. What's your goal? Yeah. So, and then it's crazy how much you learn and how much you can connect with somebody just by asking them those 4 simple questions. And then you build a trust. And then I head on to, but I do need help with everything that you're saying, because I'm fairly new to this. I've only been doing this since, well, this year. But if you follow the script and you listen to people like Donn and other people that have it down, it helps a lot. So I'm glad I jumped on here because I'm still kind of tweaking my presentation.
Well, glad to have you on here, Bonnie. Let me just, outside of PowerPoint, let me offer one little thing. If you're doing everything you're doing on Zoom, the hardest thing, and Terry, you do a lot of platform speaking. Jim, I think you have, I don't know Robert, but one of the toughest things that experienced speakers have in dealing with Zoom is we're used to being on stage with people and making eye contact. And you do that for 2 reasons. One is you need to know what your audience is doing. How are they responding? You know, if they're looking at you the way that a dog looks at a ceiling fan, that kind of Okay, that tells you that you need to step back and expand a little more, right? So you're looking for that, but you're also giving the audience the feeling of connection. Even if you got 500 people in there, if you pick out 6 or 8 people and make genuine eye contact with them, it starts feeling like a conversation to you, the speaker, and starts feeling like a conversation to the whole audience. But here in Zoom, those two things get separated. If I'm looking at the audience to see how you guys are responding, then to you, it looks like I'm looking beneath you, right? Toughest thing that experienced stage speakers have to learn in Zoom is find your camera and look at the camera, because then it doesn't feel, I want to say it doesn't feel like a speech. We don't want it to feel like a speech regardless, you know, but if you got 500 people in a live setting, it doesn't really feel like a speech if you've got that conversational tone, because they're just looking at the speaker. You know, one of the things, by the way, little tip here, if you guys have your screen in gallery view, that's where a lot of Zoom fatigue comes from, because it's like being on stage with dozens of people looking back at you. Put it on speaker view, and then it's going to feel more intimate between you and whoever's talking. So, Bonnie, you're doing great. I mean, you're sounding conversational. It's just a little tweak to find your camera and look at the camera as you talk to your prospects. And every once in a while, look down to see what they're doing. So it's about 75-25. Does that make sense?
It makes perfect sense.
Okay. Hope that'll be helpful.
One of the
Thank you.
things I did actually when I started recording, when I started doing a lot of, even when I first got a Zoom account was years ago, because I was hosting a video podcast and I was having trouble doing exactly what you were talking about. Is, you know, I was looking down here to see what everybody's doing instead of up here at my camera. And I ended up cutting a pair of eyes out of a magazine and pasting them right dead center right here to remind me that I'm talking to a human being and I need to look in the eyes, because this is where all the magic happens. And so just I did that. And another tip that I wanted to give folks, and then I'm gonna ask Bob a Bible question, is I mentioned that I don't really like PowerPoint, but exactly because of the reasons you said, the type, and it you know, it gives you this ugly Helvetica and then a slightly smaller ugly Helvetica, and then, you know, all this. I use Canva, and Canva is a free tool with a presentation that has free images, and that you can choose a great image and 6 great words, and all of a sudden, boom, you've got a presentation that you can import into PowerPoint, or I use Google Slides, import it into Google Slides or Prezi or wherever else you want to do it. But if you actually, Canva has their own presentation, you can just click through those if you want to. So that's Canva is my secret weapon. Bob Ritchie, how are you, buddy? You didn't get a chance to intro yourself. Do you have any questions, comments, anything you'd like to add? And go ahead and tell us.
No,
who you are.
I'm sad that I didn't try to get the word out more. This has been very helpful, Don. I appreciate this kind of instruction, and hopefully we'll have more of that. And we need to tell people, you know, this is what you're missing. And yeah, you know, everything you say, I think is to a large part true, especially on Zoom. We have a tendency to look at the screen, look at the people, and not look at the camera. And it's hard to try and catch it. We do a lot of Toastmaster work now on, or is either hybrid or on Zoom. So when you're giving a speech, we get to give speeches and everything in practice. But it's one of those things to be able to relate, and it's hard with Zoom, like you said, Don, versus being on stage or being in front of people.
Yeah, absolutely. I mentioned a moment ago, Robert, one of my missions in life is to help end bad PowerPoint. There's a real close second these days, and that is to help people connect as effectively and as warmly over virtual as they do in person. We'll never get there, but we can do a whole lot more than what we do. And what you're talking about just fits in there exactly. And as Terry mentioned a little earlier, Toastmasters is very close to my heart. I've been involved in Toastmasters for 22 years. So yeah, very, very good lab setting there for developing those communication skills.
Which club are you in?
I'm in the Morning Cup in Maryville, Tennessee. So
oh, okay.
And possibly you might have heard of it there. I'm assuming you're in Nashville. Is that correct, Robert?
Yeah, well, I'm a member of Donaldson Early Birds. We meet on Wednesday mornings.
Okay, I know Donaldson Early Bird. So probably meeting about the same time as us. Morning Cup meets at 7:30 a.m. on Wednesdays, although of course that's Eastern time. But the reason I think you might have heard of Morning Cup, Terry was letting me brag just a little bit earlier. I just recently won the District 63 International Speech Contest. But what I'm more proud of is the fact that out of the 4 contests, those of you who are not in Toastmasters, we generally have 4 contests each year. And so let's see, what is it here, Robert? It's international speaking, table topics, tall tales, and evaluation, right? And out of those 4 contests, Morning Cup members, our little club here in Maryville, Tennessee, won 3 of those.
I thought we had a humor speech contest too.
We do that some years. This year, they decided to do tall tales instead of the humorous.
Okay.
Yeah. So, it's just a little club here in Maryville, Tennessee, but a very effective club. I'm not only very proud of them, but proud of the impact that they're having on our community. And that's what we all do, isn't it?
Absolutely. Yeah.
Don, thank you for the impact you've had today. This has really been phenomenal. And you and I had talked to you about your other topic option, which is more effective Zoom meetings and how to work with that. Let's do this. Let's plan on I kind of went crazy and booked up speakers for this through August, I think. But toward August sometime, you and I will get back together. Matter of fact, I'll do it soon, and we'll schedule to get you back here, in the late summer, early fall to do that presentation. But tell us what you've got coming up, how we can hear more about you. I know you've written the textbook. Can we buy the book, or is it you got to be in your class to get that? Or tell us some more about what you've got going on and how we can help you.
Well, and the public speaking textbook is out of print now, unfortunately. So what's happening with me personally, I am going to be, if plans go according to plan, how often does that happen? But if I'm able to carry out my plans, I'll be retiring from teaching college this year and going full time into public speaking and speech coaching, that sort of thing. So one of the things that we offered, and I'll put it here in chat again, virtualconfidencetips.com. If you would like access to a free mini course on effective PowerPoint, and going beyond that, just a short email, probably about once a week, offering tips on virtual confidence, being as effective on Zoom. That's why I changed the logo up here now, the Zoom Confidence Cultivator. So Terry, I would be glad to talk with you about coming